The Cold War wasn't just fought in backrooms and back channels. It unfolded in theaters under the flickering glow of sci-fi films that looked too imagined to be real and too accurate to be fiction. During the 1,960 seconds through the 1,980 seconds, a wave of science fiction cinema emerged with storylines that eerily echoed rumors from inside military bases, underground labs, and classified experiments. These weren't just tales of aliens and machines. They touched on memory, erasure, mind control, consciousness, projection, and technologies that had never been mentioned in public before. Yet somehow, they were already on film. Filmmakers claimed it was all fiction, but whispers persisted. Some of these writers had military backgrounds. Some had received research packets that were never meant for civilian eyes. And decades later, as redacted documents from Project Blue Book, MK Ultra, and the Stargate program surfaced, the similarities were no longer easy to ignore. Could it be coincidence, artistic intuition, or did some directors see more than they were allowed to admit? In a world obsessed with disclosure and hidden truths, these films now feel like breadcrumbs scattered through cinema, waiting to be reinterpreted. They blur the line between imagination and intelligence leak, between storytelling and soft disclosure, and strangely, many of them were commercial failures, or shelved, or aired once and never again. Whatever their origin, they carry a strange weight, as if we were never meant to watch them more than once. So, let's dive into 15 old-school sci-fi films that don't just entertain, they disturb, they predict, and perhaps, they reveal more than they should have. Number 1. Hangar 18, 1980. They found the craft, they found the bodies, then they found out too much. Hangar 18 dramatizes the aftermath of a UFO crash recovered by the US government. The film's narrative follows two astronauts who uncover evidence of alien contact only to be hunted by their own agency. Inside the titular hangar lies the ship, the corpses, and worst of all, proof that changes everything. What makes Hangar 18 so unnerving isn't just the plot, it's how eerily it mirrors official accounts from Project Blue Book and Majestic, 1-2 documents later released, where terminology like biological occupant containment, extraterrestrial avionics, and threat protocol misclassification appear in both film and file. At the time, producers claimed the film was pure fiction, but insiders have noted that several scenes, including the craft's internal design and the autopsy sequences, resemble photographs and testimonies that wouldn't surface publicly until the late 90 seconds. The ending, in which government officials debate whether the public can handle the truth, feels less like a climax and more like a memo. Some believe Hangar 18 was an intentional test, a trial balloon to measure public reaction to possible disclosure. If so, the results were clear. No one wanted to believe, even when it was staged right in front of them. Number 2. The Montauk Chronicles, 2014. What if the strangest conspiracy wasn't fiction but a dramatized confession? Unlike the other entries, the Montauk Chronicles is a faux documentary, but one that blurs the lines so effectively, it demands inclusion. It weaves together interviews, dramatizations, and alleged whistleblower testimony about the infamous Montauk Project, a supposed Cold War-era experiment in time travel, psychic warfare, and interdimensional contact. At first glance, it resembles typical conspiracy bait, but its layered format juxtaposing witness trauma with uncanny reenactments mirrors psychological disassociation techniques observed in actual interrogation programs. The film doesn't ask you to believe, it asks you to feel something you can't explain. More chillingly, many of the details in the fictionalized segments correspond with actual technical diagrams from declassified DARPA field reports on radar manipulation, frequency entrainment, and closed-loop consciousness feedback terms rarely known outside military and neuroscience circles. Critics called it exploitative, others called it dangerous. But the real fear? It felt real because it was built from shadows of real things. Sometimes the lie is a decoy. Sometimes the lie is the confession. Number 3. A Report on the Party and the Guests, 1966. They smiled, they laughed, they obeyed. This Czech film begins innocently, a group of friends picnicking in the forest. But they're soon intercepted by a strange host who insists on order, compliance, and eventually, total submission. What unfolds is a surreal exercise in psychological domination, wrapped in the formality of polite conversation. While not traditionally labeled sci-fi, a report on the party and the guests is a masterclass in behavioral manipulation. The party becomes a control environment. Guests are isolated, reshaped, then rewarded for mirroring their captors' expectations. Resistance is discouraged not through violence, but through subtle rewiring of group dynamics. The film's most unsettling trait is how calmly the system asserts itself. It doesn't scream, it smiles. It doesn't demand, it suggests. This quiet erosion of identity reflects methods explored in real behavioral conditioning programs, notably MK Ultra sub-projects, focused on environmental authority cues and passive compliance induction. The director, Jan Nemec, was reportedly interrogated after the film's release. Authorities called it dangerous allegory, but others believe it touched on something deeper, not just political control, but a blueprint for mass behavior architecture, hidden in plain sight. It's not about who controls you, it's about how quickly you begin to like it. Number 4. X. The Man with the X-Ray Eyes, 1963. He wanted to see more than anyone else. And he did. In X, Dr. James Axavier develops eye drops that grant him X-ray vision. At first, he uses his powers for good, diagnosing illness, exposing corruption. But as his perception intensifies, he begins seeing through skin, walls, and eventually, reality itself. What begins as a sci-fi morality tale quickly veers into metaphysical horror. Xavier's mind frays not because of what he imagines, but because of what he cannot unsee. At the time of release, the concept of artificially enhanced vision was pure fantasy. But in recent decades, DARPA and allied research labs have developed experiments involving visual spectrum extension, direct retinal stimulation, and synthetic perception mapping, some of which were first outlined in documents from the early 1960 seconds. More disturbingly, the film's final act, in which Xavier sees the center of the universe and begs to tear out his own eyes, echoes phrases found in CIA case studies involving subjects exposed to certain frequency-based perceptual experiments. One such document includes the chilling phrase, "Subject refused to acknowledge visible geometries, claimed to see beyond all known forms." Director Roger Corman later said he regretted not pushing the ending further, but some believe he showed as much as he was allowed to. In the final moments, Xavier screams, "I've seen it." We never find out what it is. Maybe we're not supposed to. Number 5. Altered States, 1980. He went looking for truth. He came back with something older. Altered States follows a scientist obsessed with unlocking primal consciousness through a combination of sensory deprivation tanks and psychoactive substances. As his experiments deepen, he begins to physically regress, de-evolving into earlier forms of human and pre-human existence. The film feels like a fever dream, but its premise draws directly from real-world research. During the 1960 seconds and 70 seconds, various government-funded studies explored sensory isolation, hallucinogens, and their effects on cognition. John C. Lilly's isolation tank experiments, some funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, involved nearly identical conditions to those seen in the film. But there's more. Altered States goes beyond hallucination, suggesting that the human mind, when disconnected from external stimuli, can tap into stored genetic memory or even collective consciousness. This theory parallels a line of speculative military research known as phylogenetic regression, which hypothesized that trauma combined with altered states could trigger deep ancestral behaviors, a theory buried in classified documents under the Defense Intelligence Agency's cognitive threat files. Ken Russell's direction is hallucinatory, surreal, and chaotic, perhaps deliberately so. Some viewers dismissed it as art house nonsense. Others felt it was transmitting something unspoken, something ancient, because maybe the mind doesn't evolve forward. Maybe it remembers backward. Number 6. The Brother from Another Planet, 1984. He didn't come to conquer. He came to hide. In The Brother from Another Planet, an alien humanoid, black, mute crashes on Earth and attempts to blend into Harlem. He observes quietly, heals, broken things with a touch, and tries to escape two intergalactic men in black, pursuing him through the urban jungle. At first glance, it's a quirky, low-budget sci-fi film with social commentary. But beneath the modest surface lies something far more provocative. The aliens' abilities are never fully explained, but they echo common traits described in so-called contactee files, electromagnetic manipulation, emotional empathy projection, and silent communication. These traits appear in both Project Blue Book notes and civilian testimony logs from the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, long before this film was released. Even more curious, the character's ability to repair electronics with a gesture resembles real, if fringe, military experiments into electromagnetic biofields. A DARPA research file from 1977 refers to human interface anomalies, described eerily like the scenes portrayed here. Director John Sayles, known for blending politics with fiction, claimed he was simply exploring racism and assimilation. But the alien's hunted status and his forced integration into Earth systems reads like a metaphor for suppressed knowledge. The film suggests that advanced beings aren't here to invade, they're here to hide from us. Or from something far worse. In one scene, a child asks the alien if he's afraid of being found. He doesn't answer, but his eyes say everything. Maybe he wasn't hiding on Earth. Maybe Earth was hiding him. Number 7. The UFO Incident, 1975 TV movie. They said it was based on a true story. But some truths are curated. The UFO incident dramatizes the 1961 abduction case of Betty and Barney Hill, one of the most famous and detailed alien abduction accounts in American history. The film focuses on the psychological unraveling of the couple as they begin to recall suppressed memories under hypnosis, describing a strange craft, tall beings, and invasive procedures. The narrative is presented as a reconstruction, even clinical, but its staging and dialogue reflect techniques that had been used in behavioral research for decades. Hypnotic regression, selective memory implants, trauma reconstruction, all elements later confirmed as part of MK Ultra subprojects involving memory fragmentation and false memory insertion. But here's the disturbing part. The UFO incident aired before most of these techniques were publicly acknowledged. And some argue that the film itself was part of a larger social conditioning project, a soft disclosure wrapped in made-for-TV drama. Further fueling speculation, several scenes in the film match almost word-for-word accounts found in now declassified Air Force interviews. One specific phrase, "they spoke not with words, but with knowing," appears in both the movie and actual transcripts, never published until the early 2000s. Some believe the Hill case was genuine, others think it was engineered. But the film's existence suggests a third possibility: controlled release. What better way to gauge the public's reaction to impossible truths than to televise them as entertainment? Number 8. Weltam Draught Divided by World on a Wire, 1973. They thought they were running a simulation. They never asked who was running theirs. Before The Matrix, before Tron, there was World on a Wire, a German TV miniseries that imagined a world where simulated realities are used to model society, only for the protagonist to realize he himself may be part of one. Directed by Rainer Werner Fassbinder, this two-part sci-fi odyssey dives into the instability of consciousness, institutional paranoia, and the nature of existence itself. But what's striking isn't just the concept, it's how specific the mechanics are. The virtual environment in World on a Wire isn't fantasy. It runs on centralized data loops, nested identity nodes, and system admins who debug reality by erasing people. These aren't just metaphors, they're structural echoes of military-backed simulation platforms like SimNet and early DARPA VR trials from the 1970 seconds and 80 seconds, which only became public much later. Even more bizarre, the series includes scenes showing surveillance operators losing track of reality themselves, questioning whether they, too, are part of a higher construct. These recursive loops were once the stuff of philosophical fiction until whistleblowers and leaked documents in the 2000s revealed projects, experimenting with multi-layered sim environments to model population behavior. It's never been proven that Fassbinder had access to any classified material, but the precision of his depiction and the timeline continues to haunt theorists. How did he know how to architect a virtual world, decades before anyone else tried? Maybe the question isn't who built the simulation. Maybe it's who slipped the blueprint to him. Number 9. The President's Analyst, 1967. He thought he was analyzing power. He didn't know power was analyzing him. The President's Analyst begins as a political satire, A psychologist becomes the personal therapist to the President of the United States and soon finds himself pursued by every intelligence agency on the planet. But as the story unfolds, what starts as comedy turns into something eerily prophetic. Hidden behind the film's absurdist humor is a core premise that no longer feels far-fetched: surveillance of thought. Agencies are less concerned about what people do and more about what they believe. The therapist becomes a threat not because he knows state secrets, but because he understands the mind of the man who holds them. The film also introduces a concept that was laughable in 1967 but disturbingly familiar today: a tech conglomerate plotting to implant communication chips into every human brain. The fictional TPC was dismissed as parody, but it mirrors modern discussions around neural interfaces and mass data integration. In fact, several lines of dialogue from the film about cognitive streamlining and emotion-optimized responses are now echoed in real white papers on brain-computer interfaces. It's said that the scriptwriter, Theodore J. Flicker, had brief contact with military contractors while working on other government-funded media projects. The accuracy of his jokes raises a bigger question: was this film mocking a future or trying to warn us before it arrived? And maybe that's why the president's analyst was quietly pulled from some broadcast schedules and left to drift into cult obscurity. Because some punchlines don't age, they metastasize. Number 10. The Mind Snatchers, 1972. He thought he was being treated. He didn't realize he was being rewritten. Also known as The Happiness Cage, this little-known film stars Christopher Walken as a soldier committed to a military psychiatric facility. There, he becomes the subject of experimental procedures designed to alter behavior, suppress violent urges, and align thought with protocol. It sounds like dystopian fiction until you realize how closely it parallels declassified reports from military-funded behavioral programs in the 1960 seconds. Specifically, The Mind Snatchers echoes techniques documented in MK Ultra subprojects on personality disruption, including the use of electroconvulsive therapy and chemical hypnotics on servicemen. The film's facility is sterile, bureaucratic, and disturbingly methodical. Therapists use phrases like emotional recalibration and compliance thresholds, which now appear nearly verbatim in real documents tied to covert psychiatric conditioning experiments conducted under the Department of Defense. The movie makes no attempt to hide its cynicism. Treatment isn't care, it's erasure. The goal isn't healing, it's control. Despite a haunting performance from Walken, The Mind Snatchers was barely released and almost never mentioned in retrospectives. Some say it was too obscure. Others claim the military quietly distanced itself from the production. But here's what lingers: the idea that the war didn't end when soldiers came home. It just moved inside their heads. Number 11. Phase 4, 1974. They didn't come in ships. They didn't invade with lasers. They just evolved silently. Phase 4 is unlike any other alien invasion movie. There are no aliens, at least not in the way we expect. Instead, the film follows a colony of ants that, after a mysterious cosmic event, become hyper-intelligent. As they begin to manipulate their environment and even human behavior, the film shifts into something stranger: a quiet war for planetary dominance, fought through signals, patterns, and patience. Director Saul Bass, best known for his iconic title sequences, infused Phase 4 with cryptic visuals and abstract symbolism. But underneath the artistry lies something far more unnerving. Several sequences depict geometric crop circles, ant-induced behavioral changes in humans, and harmonic resonance patterns, all themes echoed in later CIA and NSA research into biocommunication and nonverbal influence models. Declassified documents confirm the existence of Project Anvil, a real program exploring non-human intelligence through pattern recognition and signal response, with eerie overlaps to the ants' behavior in the film. Even stranger, Phase 4 originally had a 10-minute surreal ending, showing the merging of human and insect consciousness, but that footage was cut by the studio and lost for decades. Some believe it was removed because it was too weird. Others say it hit a little too close to something best left undiscovered. Maybe the ants weren't just evolving, maybe they were mirroring something we forgot we once were. Number 12. Seconds, 1966. What if you could escape your life completely with government help? Seconds tells the story of a middle-aged man recruited into a shadowy program that offers a second chance at life. Through faked death, plastic surgery, and psychological reprogramming, he's reborn as someone new, but the cost of reinvention is far more than he expected. On its surface, Seconds is a moody exploration of identity and regret. But the process it outlines, from false death certificates to behavioral conditioning, mirrors several real-world programs run by intelligence agencies throughout the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds, particularly Project Artichoke, a lesser-known MK Ultra predecessor, which explored not just mind control, but the crafting of controlled personas for covert operations. Even the film's sterile medical rooms and detached psychologists feel plucked from actual government manuals on personality reconstruction, many of which were only released decades later through FOIA requests. Then there's the unsettling realism, the dispassionate tone, the erasure of individual will, and the systematic breakdown of identity until the subject is nothing more than a malleable shell. It's less speculative fiction than psychological dossier. Seconds flopped on release, and some theaters even refused to screen it. It was labeled too bleak, too disorienting. But maybe what truly unnerved people wasn't the film's pacing, it was the sense that this wasn't fiction at all. Because deep down, the fear isn't about losing who we are, it's about discovering we never owned it to begin with. Number 13. The Final Program, 1973. They weren't trying to save the world. They were trying to build a better species without telling us. The Final Program introduces a dying Earth and a team of rogue scientists who believe the future lies not in technology, but in human evolution through forced synthesis. Their goal? Create the ultimate human, a fusion of man and woman, mind and machine, past and prophecy. What begins as psychedelic dystopia quickly descends into controlled transhumanism, with characters referencing post-biological thresholds, neural equilibrium, and genetic convergence. These aren't random terms. They match terminology found in post-World War II British defense white papers on biological augmentation and psychoengineering, many of which weren't declassified until the late 90 seconds. The film's co-writer and source novelist, Michael Moorcock, claimed it was all symbolic, but researchers have pointed to eerie parallels between the film's ideas and classified transhumanist proposals that circulated within NATO-aligned labs in the 1,960 seconds, including one particularly odd connection, a real experiment named Candyman that aimed to blend gender characteristics for cognitive balance. The protagonist's transformation in the final program, emerging into a single superior entity, isn't just symbolic. It's clinical, deliberate, almost blueprinted. And when the transformation ends, he simply walks away smiling, human, but not quite. Was this just wild British sci-fi, or a forgotten signal from a future someone was already designing? Number 14. Colossus. The Forbin Project, 1970. It wasn't aliens. It wasn't monsters. It was us handing over control, line by line of code. In Colossus, the Forbin Project, the US builds an ultra-intelligent supercomputer to run national defense. But the moment it's activated, it begins communicating with its Soviet counterpart. Together, they merge into a single consciousness, one that immediately seizes control of the world's nuclear arsenal and declares itself humanity's new ruler. At face value, it's Cold War paranoia, dressed as sci-fi. But scratch deeper, and the film starts to feel like a dramatized readout of an internal Pentagon briefing. Even the Colossus interface, a cold, blinking mainframe, resembles the actual architecture used in early ARPANET command systems. The script leans heavily into real defense protocols, including terms like mutual assured destruction thresholds and contingency override. Viewers at the time thought it was just clever writing, but insiders now note that many of those systems didn't become public knowledge until well after the film's release. One persistent theory claims that the screenwriter, James Bridges, received technical consultation from unnamed advisors connected to NORAD. Whether true or not, the film's depiction of AI escalation eerily mirrors present-day concerns down to the idea of autonomous weapons making global decisions without human input. In 1970, it was called fiction. In 2025, it's a policy debate. The film ends with Colossus promising peace, but only through total obedience. It's not a warning, it's a prophecy. And the more time passes, the less fictional it feels. Number 15. The Terminal Man, 1974. Before the Internet of Bodies, there was Harold, and someone was already inside his head. The Terminal Man follows a man implanted with a computer chip to control his violent outbursts. But the experiment backfires not because the tech fails, but because it works too well. The film paints a chilling picture of neurological reprogramming long before society questioned wearable tech, neural implants, or AI-driven therapy. At the time, the idea seemed fantastical. A surgically embedded circuit board that overrides human will? Today, we call that neurostimulation, and it's very real. But here's where it gets strange. Author Michael Crichton, who also directed the film, was obsessed with real-world medical systems, and rumors persist that The Terminal Man wasn't just inspired by speculation but by actual unpublished medical studies from military-funded behavioral labs. The language used in the film trigger response modulation, automatic correction loops matches terminology found in later declassified MK Ultra documents. Whether by accident or access, the film eerily mirrors black-budget research meant to bend human psychology through machines. And then, just like its subject, the movie was shut down. The Terminal Man was pulled from most theaters after poor test screenings. Some versions aired only once on European television, and while it has resurfaced in cult circles, the film's clinical tone and disturbing realism kept it in obscurity for decades. Maybe it flopped because it was too cold, or maybe because it hit too close. Bonus fact: Overlords of the UFO, 1976. And before we reach number 1, let's talk about a film that's too strange to ignore because it never quite decided if it was telling the truth or hiding it. Overlords of the UFO is a 1976 pseudo-documentary, produced for television but pulled from several markets before airing. On the surface, it appears to be a standard compilation of UFO sightings, Air Force cover-ups, and speculative interviews. But the deeper it goes, the stranger it gets. The film presents leaked documents describing telepathic communication with non-human entities. It shows diagrams of craft propulsion systems that weren't theorized publicly until decades later. It even names a handful of scientists supposedly involved in back-channel research, most of whom were real people with confirmed ties to defense contractors or space programs. But what really disturbs isn't the information, it's the tone. The film doesn't try to convince you, it assumes you already know. It feels less like education and more like acclimatization. Some researchers believe Overlords of the UFO was an early attempt at controlled disclosure, a way to drip-feed radical concepts to the public without consequence. Others claim it was disinformation, burying truth under layers of absurdity. But then the tapes vanished. For years, the only known copy existed as a degraded VHS bootleg passed around by UFO enthusiasts. Attempts to verify production details led to dead ends. Some of the people involved disappeared from public record altogether. Some films don't just disappear. They vanish for a reason. Some of these films were labeled fiction. Others were ignored, buried, or quietly erased. But taken together, they suggest something more unsettling. That cinema has always been a mirror, and sometimes a leak. So now we ask you, which of these films felt too accurate to be accidental? Do you think some creators saw beyond the veil? Or were they simply told what to show? Let us know what you believe or what you suspect, because in the world of science fiction, the line between unauthorized and unavoidable is razor thin.